Have you ever thought you were a fool? In the most existential sense of the word, not just a fool, but an idiot. Someone who sees the world's beauty and misery simultaneously, who feels too much, and who understands the folly of life. Congratulations if that's the case. You've already dabbled in the idea of Dostoevsky, who created one of the most intricate literary and philosophical archetypes, the fool.
But in his opinion, what does it mean to be an idiot? What if I told you that the only way out of this sick culture we live in would be to be an idiot? The world will be saved by beauty. Dostoevsky wrote for no one's approval. He intended for his writing to cause pain and to expose wounds that the reader would rather not see. His statements are not just made up. They are razor-sharp blades that pierce the very fabric of human life. His book, The Idiot, is a tragedy-encased philosophical theory as well as a narrative, a harsh examination of what happens when a man who is truly good is thrust into a society that speaks only of corruption and selfishness. The protagonist of the story, Prince Mikhain, is the final romantic in a period that has already traded innocence for cynical cunning, goodness for calculating, and desire for money. His error? Believing in moral rectitude in a culture that has mastered the destruction of everything it cannot take advantage of. The other characters think he is a moron, an emotional outsider, a glitch in the system's code that only lets in cheaters. However, Dostoevsky poses an unsettling subject for us to consider. Who is the true fool, after all? The one who defends himself at the expense of others, or those who, in order to survive, deceive, control, and corrupt their own souls? Not only is Mikhain naive, but he also has an almost supernatural sensitivity to other people's suffering, which is what is most unsettling about him. He experiences other people's suffering as though it were his own. Emilio Cioran, a Romanian philosopher, referred to it as the torment of existing, that unusual and terrible capacity to feel other people's pain as though it were one's own. And that's the same quality that makes him so intolerable to people around him. He pulls off their masks, breaks down their barriers, and tears away their delusions of power. He doesn't level accusations, yell, or impose. However, his very existence serves as a harsh mirror that exposes the ugly aspects of other people. According to Nietzsche, who studied Dostoevsky extensively, the offended are the ones who lie the most, because outrage is frequently a defense against one's own guilt rather than a reaction to injustice. This outrage is evoked in others by Mishkin. He serves as a continual reminder that our way of life is flawed, and for those who have already become complacent in the game of social hypocrisy, this reminder is intolerable. The idiot's story appears to follow a martyr's path, but without the sainthood's renown. Mishkin is not regarded with reverence, admiration, or comprehension. At best, some people tolerate him, while many people mock him and nearly everyone destroys him. His virtue makes him a lamb ready to be killed, rather than a victorious hero. His unending compassion and love of beauty are viewed as deadly flaws that can only lead to catastrophe. Even worse, Dostoevsky might have been correct. Since perfect goodness not only challenges but also threatens the present quo, it's possible that the world isn't ready for Mishkin's. It demonstrates that there are alternative ways to play the game, which is intolerable to people who have mastered cheating. What about us? What role do we play in this narrative? Would we be able to emulate Mishkin, or would we form an alliance with his enemies? These days, people confuse coldness for maturity and cynicism for knowledge. We mock optimism, laugh at naivete, and exalt intelligence as though it were the same as knowledge. Has this alleged ingenuity, however, brought us anything but an unbearable emptiness? Dostoevsky makes us confront this dilemma without providing us with simple solutions. And what's most unsettling is that we already know the answer. Mishkin is not the idiot, as we know. We are the fools who live our entire lives defending our own lack of bravery. Prince Mishkin's goodness is simply one aspect of his tragedy. Another is the setting and period in which he lives. Russia in the 19th century was not a place where pure spirits flourished. It was an area of frantic change where the old and the new engaged in a bloody, quiet conflict. While the revolutionary principles blew like the winds of an inevitable future, the decadent aristocracy attempted to hold on to its splendor. Under the influence of modernism and pessimism, the orthodox faith that had formerly given Russian identity significance was starting to erode. Dostoevsky shaped his characters in this furnace of conflict, giving them voices that reflected the uncertainties, anxieties, and predicaments of a collapsing era. And the author himself was the only one who truly grasped this breakdown. Dostoevsky was more than just a bystander to the social and spiritual mayhem all around him. He fell prey to it. He had a series of abysses in his life. His execution was postponed at the last minute and replaced with years of forced labor in Siberia. He had been sentenced to death for his association with a group of subversive intellectuals. Dostoevsky saw the depths of the human soul there, away from the shackles of social convention among wretches and criminals. None of the prisoners wore masks, just the harsh, unvarnished reality of life. He learned that sanctity and horror were simply two sides of the same coin in this cold hell, and that depravity and salvation could coexist. His art was permanently shaped by this encounter. Dostoevsky delved into the depths of the unconscious, foreshadowing concepts that Freud and Jung would only develop decades later, in contrast to other authors of his era who preferred to use reason to comprehend man. He realized that human beings are not only controlled by reason, but also by hidden forces, unquenchable passions, unspoken desires, and intolerable paradoxes. His realism was psychological as much as social. Each figure he crafted was a confession wrapped in fiction, a living anatomy of the human spirit. Perhaps his most unsettling creation was Mishkin, the main character of The Idiot, who personified something that society has long claimed to cherish, but really hates: genuine goodness. Absolute goodness is incompatible with the workings of the world, which is the issue. Even Dostoevsky was doubtful that a pure man could endure without being ripped apart. Mishkin serves as a mirror, reflecting the hypocrisy of everyone around him because of his unwavering kindness and lack of judgment. Although he makes no accusations, his very presence highlights the moral suffering of others. For this reason, he is mocked, taken advantage of, and finally destroyed. His generosity disarms the cynics, and a disarmed cynic feels fury rather than appreciation. According to Baudelaire, the world would only pardon those who allow it to feel at ease with its own corruption. Mishkin provides no such consolation. For those who have already made too many compromises to maintain their masks, he offers an alternative way of living that is untenable. Nobody knew these strange mechanics as well as Dostoevsky. He believed that people are driven beings who can adhere to harmful illusions in order to avoid confronting their own emptiness, rather than being logical beings seeking the truth. He doesn't provide us with a clear antagonist in The Idiot. In one way or another, each character is both a victim and an executioner, a prisoner of a set of values that despises innocent and glorifies cunning. In the end, the book is a cruel experiment. What occurs when a good guy is thrust into a corrupt society? And it's always the same response. The world is not changed by the pure man. He is consumed by the world. If The Idiot teaches us anything, it is that goodness is frequently viewed as a mistake, a fundamental weakness in the fabric of existence, rather than as a highly esteemed virtue. Mishkin's story is a study of what happens when someone rejects the masks that society expects them to wear, not just a story of innocence shattered by reality. Anyone who chooses not to participate is a prime target in a culture that is dominated by the game of appearances and covert competition. The prince is not envious of his superiority or despised for his evil nature. He is hated because he does not adhere to the unseen laws that allow people who have mastered deception to live together. They lack the ability to manipulate, they are unaware of the subtleties of deceptive courtesies, and they fail to see the peril of complete sincerity. Because of this, he not only becomes a victim of other people, but also an uneasy reminder of what they have already given up in order to survive. Dostoevsky's book is hardly the only example of this dynamic. The world still operates in precisely the same manner. All you have to do is look about you. We are taught at a young age that authenticity comes with a cost, and that showing one's emotions can be a metaphorical death sentence. Anyone who fails to understand how to play the social game and grasp the art of dissimulation will eventually end up as a stranger in the nest. There is always a tacit code that establishes the boundaries of what is appropriate to feel and express, as well as what can and cannot be stated in the workplace, among friends, and even inside one's own family. The idiot in Dostoevsky is the one who disregards these standards and insists on behaving as though words had actual meaning, as though compassion were a daily practice rather than only an abstract idea. What becomes of him? In a world full of traders, the same thing occurs to anyone who chooses to be honest. He is used, abandoned, humiliated, and lonely. This strange social organization follows a straightforward logic. Being kind without being clever is viewed as a strategic mistake rather than a virtue. It is implicitly believed that as the world cannot be altered, everyone must adjust to it. People who don't take advantage of one another are at a disadvantage if everyone does. Despite its brutality, its logic makes sense inside. People will be pushed out if they don't defend their own space. People will manipulate those who don't manipulate. Those who are determined to reach out will ultimately be dragged to the bottom alongside the people they attempted to help. Mishkin personifies this catastrophe with agonizing accuracy throughout the story. He is not only unable to comprehend the games of interest, but he also has a strong aversion to learning. Dostoevsky executes this existential experiment with the surgical precision of someone who witnessed the cruelty of the world firsthand, turning him into a live sacrifice because of his naive assumption that purity can triumph over meanness. Let's not be gullible either. Over the ages, this reasoning has remained constant. Idiots of today still exist and are still being eaten. They are the ones who can't be indifferent, who can't use a cool technique to measure words, and who still think that people can be better than they actually are. What are we going to do with them? We chuckle at their ignorance. We take advantage of their kindness. When their presence becomes inconvenient, we eliminate it. The Idiot was not written by Dostoevsky as a morality story. He didn't want to persuade anyone that ultimately purity will prevail. Instead, his book is a clinical analysis of how cynicism as a whole crushes the virtuous. In addition to whether Mishkin could have survived, the question that still needs to be answered is whether we would have acted differently if we had been in his shoes. Or is it possible that we are already on the opposite side of the tale, supporting those who dare to be truthful without even realizing it? Instead of coming as a single, devastating blow, Mishkin's demise occurs gradually and almost unavoidably as his innocence is gradually weakened by conflict with a society that is unable to handle what it cannot comprehend or use. It is not overturned by an external force that aims to destroy it on purpose, by a declared opponent, or by a well-planned conspiracy. It is destroyed in a more covert, sneaky manner. It is the inevitable result of its being in a setting where perfect virtue cannot find a place to grow without being trampled underfoot. To defeat it, an attack is not necessary. It only needs to exist for its tragedy to play out on its own, like a clock that is inevitably coming to an end. The story's central contradiction is that, unlike what his critics claim, Mishkin is not an intellectual idiot. He is observant, educated, and extremely sensitive to the suffering and worries of others around him. His intelligence, however, deviates from the social pragmatism and cunning calculation that characterize human relationships. He has no idea how to play the game of hidden power, manipulation, or seduction. His reasoning is different, almost odd, because he thinks that relationships should be built on sincerity, that decisions should be made with compassion, and that even the most perverted people can be saved by the beauty of their souls. And he is condemned because of this conviction. Being natural is the hardest posture, as Oscar Wilde once said. Mishkin doesn't create a persona to conform to the expectations of others, nor does he posture or fake. He just is. Ironically, this makes him intolerable to people who are used to hiding behind masks. People that come into contact with him are unsure of how to respond. Some attempt to make fun of him, some try to take advantage of him, and some secretly harbor an uneasy mix of respect and disdain. With his intense and destructive passion, Rogodin sees something in him that he wants but is unable to comprehend. Consumed by the flames of her own destruction, Nastasia Philippovna alternates between viewing him as a sad ingenue and a redeemer. He is viewed by the other characters as an enigma and an odd piece on the social chessboard, someone whose existence goes against the harsh reasoning to which everyone has come. That's precisely what agitates them. The idea that virtue and reality cannot coexist, and that compromise is necessary for existence, does not apply to Mishkin. His presence exposes the myth that everyone would rather continue to believe, that perfect virtue is really a childish delusion, and that corruption is unavoidable. In actuality, though, Mishkin is more than just a victim. In addition, he is a symptom, a mirror of the inconsistencies Dostoevsky perceived in human nature. In some respects, he is an extreme form of Christ, a man who makes an effort to bear the weight of other people's pain without expecting anything in return. But because of that, he becomes intolerable to those who can't stand being so close. According to Tocqueville, nothing is more difficult to forgive than superiority that degrades us. Even though he doesn't try to force himself on anyone, Mishkin degrades people just by being there. For keeping in mind that things could be different, that people could be better, and that dominance and submission don't have to be the only rules in the world, he does not, however, win. Since Mishkin's sorrow affects not only him but all of humanity, there is no hope for his salvation. He doesn't understand the world, but that doesn't make him an idiot. He knows it too well, which makes him the fool. Despite this, he disregards the guidelines that would ensure his life. Dostoevsky ultimately leaves us without simple solutions. He doesn't provide us a way forward or comfort us with a message of hope. Rather, he makes us confront the depths of our own hypocrisy and consider how we would treat a Mishkin if we encountered him today. Or would we keep destroying people who remind us of all we've lost in the process? Only the breakdown of his own identity might mark the end of Mishkin's voyage. Because his sorrow is not ennobling, he does not become a martyr in the traditional sense. There is no exalted sacrifice that motivates others to change, no cathartic atonement. He doesn't have a dramatic death or cause those who destroy him to undergo a moral transformation. Like a light smothered by its own flame, his fall is silent, a slow emptiness of all that he was. Ultimately, all that is left is the ghost of a guy who made an effort to live a moral life in a society that rejects anything that cannot be corrupted or absorbed. In addition to being tragic, his tragedy serves as harsh proof that human complexity and perfect purity cannot coexist without being destroyed. Dostoevsky compels us to confront this reality head-on. Unlike other less cruel writers, he does not provide us with a late comfort, a sugary morality that puts history back in balance. There is no ultimate turning point where the world yields to the power of a truly good spirit, where the corrupt repent, or where the villains own their errors. Mishkin is demolished where he had to go, but not because he did something incorrectly, but rather because there was nothing he could have done differently. Trusting, giving up, and attempting to help people who have already chosen their own demise are all perfectly acceptable. As Nietzsche cautioned us, his error, if you can call it that, was to assume that people would desire to be cured, and that human suffering was merely a fleeting miscommunication that could be resolved with acts of kindness and understanding. People who couldn't hear the music thought individuals who were spotted dancing were crazy, and Mishkin danced by himself, not understanding that his dance was offensive as well as confusing to others who watched. The biggest irony of his career is that he never made an effort to force his beliefs on others. He didn't think he could impose goodness on anyone, in contrast to extremists, strict moralists, or dogmatic reformers. He just lived his life as he was, thinking that his very existence and mannerisms could be sufficient to light up the darkness of others. However, there is a profoundly unsettling quality about someone who doesn't make demands, pass judgment, or attempt to mold people to fit their own needs. Their very existence serves as a mirror, an uneasy reflection of all that others have sacrificed for their own survival. When a mirror reflects what we would prefer not to see, what do we do with it? We shatter it, we chuckle about it, we hate it till it takes on whole different forms. When Mishkin falls, no screams are heard. There isn't a dramatic epilogue in which he demands retribution or confronts his betrayer. His demise is that of a person who fades away, who vanishes into a state of mental breakdown. His reason has been crushed by the world around him, leaving him with no place in the surrounding reality, which is why he has been reduced to lunacy rather than losing it. And that's possibly the scariest part of his tale. He is vanquished by the accumulation of minor indifferences, common cynicism, and contempt masquerading as superiority, rather than by a powerful adversary or an overpowering outside force. The emptiness of people who have no idea what to do with their lives engulfs it. According to T.S. Eliot, the world ends with a sigh rather than an explosion. And what's left now? To regard Mishkin as an ethereal reminder of a past that is no longer ours, or to realize that his tragedy keeps happening every day in the little acts of disdain, in the sarcasm masquerading as wisdom, in the reluctance to acknowledge that kindness, if it exists at all, cannot live independently. Dostoevsky doesn't provide us with answers. Instead, it makes us confront the question we've been avoiding all our lives. Are we the fools for growing too intelligent? If there's one thing that Dostoevsky teaches us with The Idiot, it's that goodness, when authentic, can be seen as a threat in a world shaped by selfishness and the game of appearances. Mishkin didn't make a mistake because he was good, but because he believed that purity could exist without resistance in an environment that only rewards those who learn to protect themselves through dissimulation. In the end, the question that remains is not just about his fate, but about us. What do we do with those who refuse to play the game? Are we any different from those who crushed Mishkin? Or have we learned to tolerate, without realizing it, the brutal logic that destroys those who don't fit in? If this video made you think, even for a second, then it was worth it. Now I want to know, do you think genuine kindness can survive in the real world? Or is it doomed to the same fate as Mishkin? Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you liked this analysis, please like it because it helps the channel a lot. And subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the next reflection.